the eternal voice.
If this finds you in the gentle hush before sleep, leave a light on for the cats and subscribe for the journey ahead. Tonight, you stand at the edge of a curtain, not velvet, but the woven gauze between waking and elsewhere. The Dreamlands wait behind it. Not a metaphor, but a mapped cosmos, a world of star-silk skies and whispering water, accessible by sleep and paid for in identity. Here you are not only spectator, but understudy, drawn onto a stage whose script has already begun. The Dreamlands are geography for the soul, jurisprudence for the self, and the price of entry is simple: sleep. The cost of knowledge is more complex. Lovecraft did not merely imagine dream as metaphor, he charted it as empire. In stories like The White Ship, Celephaïs, The Cats of Ulthar, and The Dream-Quest of Unknown Kadath, he describes cities of opal and onyx, deserts of dust, and gods who are thin, beautiful, and petty. Masks smile without eyes, coins are paid in memory. In the Dreamlands, curiosity is a current, but the current chooses the swimmer's destination. This is not the shapeless chaos of ordinary dreams, where logic dissolves and narrative fragments into sensation. This is a realm with its own physics, its own laws, its own terrible consistencies. If you have ever woken with the taste of salt on your tongue and no sea for miles, you have already touched the water here. Every step you take writes you deeper into a script that does not wait for your consent. Names bite back. A sigil learned is a sigil owed. The veil is a gate, the gate is a key, and the key may turn you as much as you turn it. Once you know where the seam is, it will catch at your fingers each time you close your eyes. The boundary becomes permeable not through force, but through recognition. You cannot unsee the curtain once you have glimpsed its edges. Consider the mechanics that govern this strange jurisdiction. Sleep is the passport, memory the currency, and desire the compass that points toward destinations you cannot name until you arrive. But the Dreamlands are not escape, they are expansion. They do not replace reality but reveal its provisional nature, the way a backstage glimpse shows the ropes and pulleys that hold up the sky. The waking world maintains its authority through consensus, through the collective agreement that matter is solid, time is linear, and identity is fixed. The Dreamlands operate under different articles of faith. Here, in this realm of moonbeam and shadow, cats possess ancient wisdom and speak in purrs that resonate with cosmic frequencies. The city of Ulthar enforces a single sacred law: no man may kill a cat. This is not sentiment but recognition. Cats move between worlds with an ease that human consciousness can barely comprehend. Their golden eyes have seen the spaces between stars, the territories that exist in the margins of possibility. To harm them is to sever connections between realities, to close doors that should remain open. In Leng, merchants trade in more than goods. They deal in possibilities, in the substance of dreams themselves. The harbor fog conceals black galleys whose sails absorb light rather than catching wind. Payment is made in onyx, cold to the touch and black as the spaces between heartbeats. The merchant's ledgers record transactions that would make no sense in waking commerce. A childhood memory for safe passage, 3 recurring nightmares for a map to the moon, the color of your first love's eyes for knowledge of the paths that lead beyond Leng. You have already begun the journey, the moment you learned of Ulthar's law, of Leng's fog, of the silver key that opens not doors but possibilities. That moment you crossed the threshold. The idea acts on you now. Knowledge is contagion, and curiosity the vector by which it spreads. The Dreamlands do not wait for your permission. They wait for your attention. Each name you learn becomes an anchor, each image a coordinate in a geography that exists primarily in the spaces between thoughts. The silver key itself deserves particular attention. In Lovecraft's telling, it is not merely a tool, but a principle made manifest, the recognition that consciousness possesses the power to unlock realities beyond the consensus framework of ordinary experience. The key is cold against your palm because it carries the temperature of spaces where warmth has never existed. It weighs more than metal should because it carries the density of compressed possibility. When you turn it, you are not opening a lock, but acknowledging a choice that has always been available. This is the first lesson the Dreamlands teach. Agency is more complex than it appears. In waking life, you believe you choose your thoughts, direct your attention, control your responses. But in the realm beyond the curtain, thought chooses you. Ideas arrive with their own momentum, carrying implications you did not invite. The landscape itself possesses intent, drawing travelers toward destinations that serve purposes beyond individual desire. Tonight, when darkness finally claims your attention and consciousness begins its nightly dissolution, you will carry this knowledge with you into the territory beyond thought. The Dreamlands wait, patient as stone, vast as the spaces between stars. They have always been there, accessible to any consciousness, willing to pay the price of entry. The only question is whether you will remember the journey when morning returns you to the consensus reality of waking life, or whether the memory will fade like mist before the sun, leaving only the faint taste of salt and the echo of purring in the corners of your mind. The Dreamlands did not spring fully formed from Lovecraft's imagination. They crystallized from older fogs, ancestral mists that had been gathering in literature's margins for centuries. Lord Dunsany's dream cities glowed like lanterns hung in mist, their towers spiraling upward without foundation. Their names like music, Perd-Andaris, Babelkund, the city of wonder that exists only in the moment before waking. Poe drifted down shadowed waters where physics becomes negotiable, his vessels sailing toward destinations that cannot be reached by conventional navigation. Coleridge woke with a palace vanishing on his tongue, leaving behind only fragments of impossible architecture that would haunt literature's collective memory. Bierce turned sleep into frontier and hazard, where consciousness becomes outpost against territories that refuse to remain safely unconscious. Lovecraft read these as one reads a star chart, orienting, not owning. Each predecessor had glimpsed fragments of the territory, sketched portions of the map, but none had attempted the full cartography that would emerge when dreams stopped being metaphor and became jurisdiction. He understood that his literary ancestors had been mapping the same territory from different vantage points, each contributing coordinates to a geography that existed primarily in the spaces between thoughts. His early Polaris looks backward, a soldier staring up at a cold star that watches him in return, consciousness divided between contemporary New England and ancient Lomar, with equal claim to authenticity. In The White Ship, a lighthouse keeper boards a vessel of milk-colored wood and learns that beauty without tether becomes abyss, sailing beyond the basalt pillars of the West into territories where desire becomes destination and longing transforms into landscape. These are rehearsals, preliminary sketches for a grander design. The real performance begins when dream stops being metaphor and becomes jurisdiction, when the ephemeral quality of night visions solidifies into consistent, navigable, and dangerously real alternate universe. Transmission was not only literary, but communal, a whispered conspiracy among correspondents who understood the true nature of the veil. Through letters, those nighttime rivers of ink, flowing between Providence, Auburn, and Cross Plains, the Dreamlands became commons patrolled by cats and scholars alike. Lovecraft's circle expanded the territory with methodical precision. Clark Ashton Smith seeded jeweled necropolises in distant Zothique, bringing decadent grandeur to the dream realm's outer reaches. Robert E. Howard contributed iron dawns and grim sorceries, hinting at the ancient, savage forces that lurked beneath civilized surfaces. August Derleth would later attempt to systematize its chaotic beauty, binding the currents into black cloth and gilt, so that the rivers kept running when their first navigator was ash. Each author contributed stone to the growing edifice, star to the celestial map, fresh mask for the entities that dwelled in territories accessible only through sleep and sustained only by attention. This collaborative crafting reinforces a profound truth. The Dreamlands are not private fantasy, but collective unconscious made manifest. They function as social agreement, shared delusion, or perhaps shared revelation, whose reality is upheld by the very act of contemplation and dissemination. To speak of the Dreamlands, to read of them, to imagine them, is to contribute to their growing solidity. The transmission continues through channels that Lovecraft could not have anticipated. Role-playing tomes provide atlases, complete with statistical mechanics for navigating dream territories and hexagonal maps that measure mist itself. Painters pour skies of aquamarine over onyx harbors, depicting architecture that exists only in the margins of possibility. Digital worlds build gardens of stone and moonlight, where players wake under lamplight, weapon in hand, understanding without instruction that dream is simultaneously battleground and hospital. Each medium adds layers to the palimpsest, new interpretations that both preserve and transform the original vision. But lineage carries obligations that extend beyond artistic influence. The Dreamlands function as social contract, agreement between consciousness and possibility, that operates according to principles you may not fully understand until you have already signed. Knowledge creates responsibility. Attention generates obligation. To learn the names, Ulthar, Dilithlin, Celephaïs, Leng, is to become party to arrangement whose terms were established long before your individual awareness encountered them. The cats know this. They move between worlds with ease that suggests understanding of the boundary's contractual nature. Their purrs resonate at frequencies that consciousness recognizes as familiar, though you cannot remember where you first heard that particular vibration. They serve as guides for those who approach the Dreamlands with proper respect, but they also function as gatekeepers, preventing access to those whose intentions would destabilize the delicate equilibrium that allows the territory to maintain coherence. Lineage is contract you did not negotiate. The Dreamlands are not just escape. They are social agreement, collective unconscious made manifest. To step inside is to enter contract whose clauses are written in sleep and collateralized by your own past. Be careful what you remember too vividly, for the Dreamlands favor those whose memories are both anchor and sail. Your recollections become waypoints. Your desires become currents that can pull you across vast distances. Your fears become the very monsters that guard certain thresholds. Tonight, as you prepare to cross the threshold into sleep, remember that you carry this lineage with you. Every story you have heard, every image that has lodged in the spaces between thoughts, every moment when reality seemed suddenly provisional, these become your credentials, your passport to territories that exist primarily in the margins of consensus reality. The territory responds to psychological authenticity rather than conscious intent, recognizing the difference between genuine longing and mere curiosity, between memories that carry emotional weight and those that exist only as information. You feel the rails beneath your feet now, the sway of a car you didn't know you boarded. The more you trace the routes, the more you understand. Transmission is not museum, but corridor, and corridors lead somewhere. The veil is gate, the gate is key. The key calls for hand that is already yours. In the next turn, we will examine the precise mechanics that govern this strange jurisdiction, how the stagehands work the ropes, where the trapdoors open, which passwords are spoken softly in fog by water under stars. You do not simply enter the Dreamlands. You find yourself already moving. The gate is not a visible door, but a condition of mind, the innocence to believe, the memory to anchor, the desire to pierce the veil. Lovecraft gives you implements, most famously, the silver key. In the silver key, it is not simple metal, but a permission granted by hunger for the past. The key opens not a door, but a time within you where all doors are possible. It weighs heavy in your palm because it carries the density of compressed possibility, cold because it has touched spaces where warmth was never invented. The mechanics that govern passage are precise as clockwork, subtle as mist. Sleep is necessary, but not sufficient. Ordinary dreaming produces only fragments, faces without names, corridors that lead nowhere, conversations in languages you almost remember. The Dreamlands require more deliberate preparation, a specific quality of consciousness that hovers between surrender and intention. The 7 cryptical books of Shan whisper their techniques in margins that blur when you try to focus on them directly. The Pennacotic manuscripts suggest coordinates written in a script that rearranges itself according to the reader's level of understanding. Certain hills under certain stars thin the boundary between stage and backstage, creating natural doorways for those who know how to recognize the signs. Travel within the Dreamlands follows its own logic. You move by staircase that descends through solid earth, by water that flows upward toward destinations that exist only in the spaces between thoughts, by night gaunt whose wings beat with the rhythm of your own pulse. Time becomes malleable. A night's sleep may span decades of dream experience, while a lifetime of accumulated memory can compress into a dream's minute. The usual relationship between duration and experience dissolves, replaced by a more fundamental connection between attention and reality. Agency undergoes profound transformation in this territory. In waking life, you choose a thought, direct your attention, control the flow of consciousness through familiar channels. Here, thought chooses you. The idea acts on you with its own momentum, carrying implications and destinations that extend far beyond individual intention. You become not navigator but passenger, not author but character in a narrative whose plot was established long before your individual consciousness encountered it. The Dreamlands are not only a place, but a method by which the multiverse touches itself through you, using your awareness as a lens through which to examine its own infinite possibilities. Consider the figure of Umar at-Tawil, the prolonged of life, who stands at the ultimate gate beyond which ordinary identity cannot pass. He represents both threshold and abyss, the final boundary where the comfortable fiction of individual selfhood dissolves into something vastly more complex. Beyond him, identity fractures into chorus, revealing that what you had taken for unified consciousness is actually a symphony of perspectives, each one equally valid, each one contributing its voice to the greater harmony of awareness itself. The implements of passage carry their own weight of significance. The silver key responds not to conscious will, but to authentic longing, the kind of desire that emerges from the deepest layers of memory and aspiration. It recognizes the difference between mere curiosity and genuine hunger for transformation. The key turns easily in the hands of those who approach the Dreamlands with proper respect, but it becomes impossibly heavy for those who seek to exploit or dominate the territory they hope to enter. Night gaunts serve as psychopomps, guides between worlds whose silence preserves the mystery necessary for transition. Their facelessness reflects the anonymity required for true transformation. To cross between realities, you must be willing to temporarily release your attachment to the specific features that define your identity in ordinary consciousness. They carry travelers not through physical space, but through layers of awareness, each transition requiring a subtle death and rebirth of perspective. The mechanics extend beyond individual experience to encompass the very structure of reality itself. The Dreamlands exist in a state of constant negotiation between possibility and actuality, maintained by the collective attention of all those who have ever glimpsed their territories. Each dreamer who successfully navigates their passages contributes to the growing solidity of the realm, while those who approach with insufficient preparation or improper intention may find themselves lost in territories that dissolve beneath their feet. Mechanics are not simply lore, they are instructions for the audience. The cost of entry is paid in memory, desire, and attention. Night gaunts serve as psychopomps, guides between worlds whose silence preserves the mystery necessary for transition. Their facelessness reflects the anonymity required for true transformation. Tonight, when you approach the threshold of sleep, remember that the gates respond not to force, but to recognition. The key turns when you understand that the door was never locked, only hidden. The night gaunts arrive when you demonstrate readiness for transformation that requires temporary dissolution of everything you thought you knew about reality and identity. In the distance, cities wait under alien stars, each governed by laws that will test what you have learned about the mechanics of passage. Ulthar comes first, where mercy is law. No man may kill a cat. The cobblestones remember every paw that has touched them, and the single statute pulses through the city's foundations like blood through veins. Cats move between veils, their eyes remembering stars that never rose over earth, constellations whose light carries frequencies that human consciousness receives as whispers in the spaces between thoughts. The law is not quaint. It is covenant, protection for those who walk softly between worlds, recognition that some creatures serve as ambassadors to territories where human logic dissolves like sugar in rain. Cats in the Dreamlands are not pets, but priests, guardians of thresholds who remember what humans have forgotten in their rush toward rational consciousness. Their massacre would sever connections between worlds, closing doors that consciousness requires for its more adventurous explorations, silencing frequencies that resonate in the spaces where possibility becomes actuality. The citizens of Ulthar move with careful grace, understanding they share their territory with beings whose purposes extend far beyond the merely terrestrial. Gardens grow herbs that bloom only under moonlight, their scents carrying messages between dimensions, while buildings curve around spaces where cats prefer to sleep, creating natural amphitheaters where purring thins the boundaries between waking and dreaming. Dilith Leng, reached by water that remembers you as cargo, rises from fog and appetite, where the usual rules of commerce undergo profound transformation. Black ships arrive on tides that flow according to psychological rather than gravitational forces, their sails swallowing moonlight, their holds filled with merchandise that exists primarily in the spaces between thoughts. The merchants trade in more than goods. They deal in possibilities, in the substance of dreams themselves, in fragments of experience that become part of their permanent inventory. Onyx is their preferred currency, cold to the touch and black as the spaces between stars, each piece carrying the weight of compressed possibility. The stone responds to intention rather than heat, warming in hands whose desires align with the deeper currents of the Dreamlands, remaining cold for those who approach with purely selfish motivations. Trade is ritual. Contracts bind with the force of prayer, sealed not with signatures but with exchanges of memory. The fog that perpetually shrouds the harbor serves multiple functions, concealing the true nature of cargo that moves through these docks, protecting both merchants and customers from knowledge that might prove overwhelming for unprepared consciousness. When you hear chains sink without splash, you understand. Commerce is theology disguised as paperwork, and the sea is a ledger that never loses a page. The black galleys sail toward destinations that exist only on maps, drawn in languages that predate human speech, carrying passengers who paid their passage in currencies more precious than gold, the color of first love's eyes, 3 recurring nightmares, a childhood memory of perfect safety. Celephaïs is memory-made stone, existing at the intersection of nostalgia and architecture. Kharanas, its king, dreams the city into being through sheer force of longing, ruling towers that exist only where nostalgia is strongest. But the city is not solipsism. It accepts your memory but assigns it only one district, incorporating personal recollection into a larger municipal structure that serves purposes beyond individual desire. The Dreamlands do not become your dream. They accept your proposition and place it in the ledger, alongside countless other contributions to the growing metropolis of collective memory. The king himself embodies the city's principle, having chosen dream over waking life, his consciousness serving as foundation upon which the entire structure rests. Yet Celephaïs has grown beyond his individual memory, incorporating the recollections and longings of every dreamer who has glimpsed its towers. Streets curve the way stories do when retold fondly. The air smells faintly of tea and rain on chalk. Guards salute the childhood you remember more than the face you wear. Between these cities, the landscape carries meaning in every shadow and stone. Zoogs whisper in thickets, their conversations creating networks of information that span the entire realm, trading gossip for crumbs and selling travelers to their own shadows when bargains smell of mushrooms. The river Skye draws borders that shift according to psychological weather, sometimes running clear when cats watch from walls, hardening into law when masks turn their smiles away. Mount Negranek carves its face into the sky, a landmark whose features change subtly to reflect the inner state of whoever observes it, its countenance resembling the Great One's, or perhaps the mountain remembering the first mask it wore. Each city imposes a mask you can wear, at first without losing yourself. In Ulthar, you become protector of the vulnerable, student of wisdom that cats carry between worlds. In Plateau, you become merchant of possibilities, negotiator of contracts that bind consciousness to purposes larger than individual desire. In Celephaïs, you become curator of memory, collaborator in the ongoing construction of collective recollection. These masks are training wheels, preparation for territories where rules become less forgiving and costs more severe. To go beyond, to Leng or Kadath, is to leave the comfort of law for the hunger of the unknown, to abandon the safety of established covenant for regions where consciousness must negotiate directly with forces that recognize no authority but their own alien purposes. The cities teach you how to wear identity lightly, how to adapt to different principles of reality, how to maintain coherence while allowing transformation through contact with the genuinely other. Tonight, when sleep carries you across the threshold, you will find yourself choosing which mask to wear, which laws to accept as the price of passage through territories that exist primarily in the spaces between thoughts, where the stage extends beyond every door and the curtain keeps lifting without ever quite landing. Plateau's fog hides the black galleys, their sails absorbing rather than reflecting light, creating holes in the visible spectrum where vessels should be. The harbor fog serves multiple purposes, concealing transactions that would destabilize consensus reality, protecting both merchants and customers from knowledge that unprepared consciousness cannot safely process. Payment is made in onyx, cold to the touch, and heavy with compressed possibility, each piece carved with symbols that shift meaning depending on the angle of observation and the psychological state of the observer. The mineral rings softly when counted, a sound that resonates at frequencies consciousness receives, as whispers in languages it almost remembers. At night, when the fog thickens into something approaching solid matter, cargo goes up, not out, lifted toward destinations that exist above the conventional dome of sky, toward markets that operate according to principles that would shatter terrestrial understanding of commerce and value. Chains rattle through fog and vanish into darkness that feels like altitude, and the crews handle their winches with the hush of chapel ushers, understanding they participate in rituals whose true significance extends far beyond mere transportation. The moon is not sanctuary, but market, its pale cities staring back across the void, with windows that never close, their light carrying frequencies that consciousness receives, as commandments disguised as suggestions. The lunar settlements exist in permanent negotiation between possibility and actuality, their architecture shifting subtly to accommodate the psychological weather of their inhabitants. Streets curve according to the logic of desire rather than engineering. Buildings grow taller or shorter depending on the dreams of those who sleep within them. Marketplaces expand and contract like breathing, their stalls offering merchandise that exists primarily in the spaces between thoughts. The moon beasts, eyeless and glistening, are creatures of rubbery flesh whose forms shift subtly in the dim alien moonlight. They trade in secrets and slaves, contracts inked in a script that stains the mind with knowledge that cannot be unlearned. Their faces are smooth as polished stone, lacking conventional features that terrestrial consciousness uses to interpret intention and emotion. Instead, they navigate by sound, not crude vibrations that human ears detect, but subtle frequencies that consciousness generates. When it encounters the genuinely alien, they recognize in focused will something approaching their own terrible intensity, the kind of concentrated intention that can reshape reality through sheer force of attention. To witness their transactions is to become party to them. The idea acts on you with its own momentum, carrying implications that extend far beyond individual choice or intention. Knowledge creates obligation. Attention generates responsibility. Curiosity becomes contract sealed not with signatures but with the irreversible act of understanding. Their ledgers record transactions that would make no sense in terrestrial commerce. 3 childhood nightmares for safe passage to Leng. The memory of your mother's voice for knowledge of paths that lead beyond the ultimate gate. The color of autumn leaves for permission to forget what you have learned about the true nature of moonlight. Trade here is not side quest but spinal cord, the circulatory system through which the Dreamlands maintain coherence across vast territories of sleep and dream. Through these routes, Nyarlathotep's masks travel, smiling, weeping, instructing, interfaces more than disguises, instruments for tuning audiences to frequencies at which commandments sound like choices. Messages cross where law cannot reach, carrying information that would destabilize the careful equilibrium, allowing consensus reality to maintain its authority. The quarries of Inganok deepen into negative space, their workers extracting not stone but the substance of possibility itself, mining raw material from which dreams are constructed. Commerce is theology disguised as paperwork, each transaction a ritual that binds consciousness to purposes larger than individual desire. The merchants understand that every exchange alters both parties, that value exists not in objects but in relationships between consciousness and possibility. Their scales measure weight that has nothing to do with physical mass, calibrated instead to the density of compressed experience, the specific gravity of memory transformed into currency. On decks varnished with nights of salt, sailors speak contracts as liturgy, and the purser keeps ledgers whose numbers rearrange when tides turn, because theology here wears the costume of bookkeeping. At Leng's Plateau, jurisdiction shifts from maritime law to mountain liturgy, from ledger to litany. The high places operate according to different principles, where thin air carries voices, speaking in languages that predate human speech, where cold burns with intensity that transforms rather than destroys. Here, the usual relationship between merchant and customer dissolves into something more complex, collaboration between consciousness and forces that govern reality's deeper layers. The moon beasts conduct rites of sail with grace terrible to watch, their rubbery limbs arranging offerings with tenderness. Oh, midwife gives to breath. When they tilt their heads, you hear, or think you hear, the click of a Bacchus beads behind bone. They are merchants of the interval, experts in gaps between intention and act. Their contracts are not written on parchment but inked directly into witnesses, creating stippled afterimages that persist on the inside of eyelids, clauses that recite themselves when you wash hands or hear rope slide across wood. We have entered the arteries of Dreamlands economy, where masks, markets, and moonlight bind and divide consciousness according to principles operating beyond terrestrial law's reach. The routes are not merely geographical but ontological, carrying transformations disguised as cargo across vast territories of sleep and dream. Each journey changes both passenger and destination. Each transaction alters the fundamental relationship between consciousness and possibility. You feel the doctrine in your bones when anchors lift without sound and prows point not to horizon but to chalk-white scars across sky. The stage extends beyond every door, and the curtain keeps lifting without ever quite landing. Tonight, as fog thickens and black galleys arrive on tides flowing according to psychological rather than gravitational forces, remember that you are no longer merely observer but participant in an economy trading in consciousness itself. Down where names grow thin and hunger older than law waits in dust and shadow, the next act of this cosmic drama prepares to unfold. Kadath is dust, not fog, and its pits are filled with ghasts, limbs all elbows, eyes all hunger, their forms suggesting what happens when appetite outlasts anatomy. The air here carries grit that settles in your throat and behind your eyes, particles of ground bone and powdered possibility that make every breath a conscious choice between sustenance and surrender. This is not the salt tang of Dilithlian's harbor mist, but something far more insidious, dust that remembers every name it has abraded away, every identity it has worn down to component syllables. Night gaunts ferry travelers across the Vale's treacherous geography, their silence a verdict rendered without appeal, their wings beating with rhythms that sound like pages turning in books, written in languages that predate speech itself. Their facelessness reflects more than alien anatomy. It embodies the anonymity required for passage through territories where individual identity becomes liability rather than asset. They respect purpose in the way a tide respects the moon, not from choice but from recognition of forces that maintain coherence against dissolution. Gugs lumber through subterranean caverns beneath the pits, their massive forms creating spaces where echoes lose their way and sounds arrive decades after the events that created them. Once city builders whose monuments still dot the landscape like broken teeth, they now dream with their mouths open beneath the ground, their vertical jaws like stage, curtains drawn the wrong way, teeth forming a proscenium where prayers go to be unstitched. Their dreams are not personal narratives but geological processes, slow transformations that reshape the very bedrock of consciousness itself. Here, Language thins like air at altitude, leaving consciousness gasping for words that maintain their meaning long enough to complete thoughts. Names slip from your tongue before you can speak them, sliding away like water through cupped hands, leaving behind only the memory of having known something important that now hovers just beyond recall. You reach for your own name and find it is not where you left it. The mental filing system that organizes experience proving unreliable in Panath's erosive atmosphere. The horror is not death, but the stripping of identity, structural, not personal. Death would be merciful compared to this gradual dissolution of the frameworks that allow consciousness to maintain coherence across time. The mask comes off, not by choice but by attrition, worn away by the abrasive dust and the silent, consuming hunger of the place. Beneath it is only a sound, not even a scream, but something more fundamental, the noise consciousness makes when it encounters the spaces between thoughts and discovers they are not empty but filled with appetites older than language. In Panath, the most terrifying currency is coherence itself. Language bleeds here like a wound that refuses to close, sentences fragmenting mid-thought, leaving consciousness to navigate territories where meaning dissolves faster than it can be constructed. You begin to notice how much of self is stitching between sounds, how consciousness depends on the continuous narrative thread that connects one moment to the next. The stitches can be picked out by fingers you cannot see, not malevolent entities, but the natural forces that operate in regions where the usual rules of psychological coherence no longer apply. Pronouns prove treacherous, shifting reference without warning, creating confusion about who is speaking, who is being addressed, who bears responsibility for actions taken in territories where identity becomes fluid. You say I, and it echoes as he. You think we, and it answers as no one. The dust wears a mask of quiet, but beneath it is appetite, and appetite is a judiciary old as stone. Randolph Carter crossed here, shielded by purpose. Purpose is armor, and night gaunts respect it. His quest for the sunset city of his dreams provided the concentrated intention necessary to maintain coherence while navigating territories where lesser motivations would dissolve like sugar in acid. He kept his eyes on a vision whose afterimage burned like a sigil behind his lids, the sign and the stage direction at once. Purpose served as psychological exoskeleton, maintaining the structural integrity necessary for consciousness to survive contact with forces that recognize no authority but their own alien appetites. In Panath, the currency is attention. Pay with it, and your waking life will blur at the edges as if someone breathed on the glass between you and your morning. Every moment spent observing the ghast's grotesque choreography, every second lost in contemplating dissolution, exacts a price. The cost is not only survival, but coherence, the ability to maintain consistent identity across the boundaries of sleep and waking. What is lost here is not life, but arrangement, of mask to face, of sign to referent, of law to mercy. Listen to the dust. It whispers stories in voices that sound like your own, telling tales of travelers who paid too much attention to the wrong scenes. The dust tells you a rule you do not want to learn. Attention is currency, and like any currency, it can be spent unwisely. Pay too much to the wrong scene, and you will never be paid back. Keep some in reserve, like gold sewn into the hem of a traveler's cloak, for the moment when the stage lamps fail, and only focused can navigate the darkness ahead. The ghasts swarm when you falter, attracted to the sweetness of unmoored focus, feeding not on flesh but on the connective tissue between your thoughts. Above, beyond the veil's dusty boundaries, other territories wait, some offering renewed law, others promising even greater challenges to consciousness. The curtain rises and rises but does not land, exposing rafters where stars once hung like careful props. Tonight, as you prepare for passage, remember that some spectacles cost more than they are worth. Randolph Carter is a scholar of the stage who forgot to applaud. He chases the city of his dreams through territories that have become his curriculum, each location a lesson in the Dreamlands' deeper principles. The sunset city that once rose behind his childhood eyelids has vanished like a theater lamp, snuffed between acts, leaving him to navigate by starlight and memory through realms that test everything consciousness thinks it knows about desire, identity, and home. The quest begins with loss, not the dramatic loss of tragedy, but the subtle erosion that comes with accumulated knowledge. The Dreamlands, once easily accessible through the natural porosity of childhood consciousness, now require conscious effort, deliberate navigation through territories that resist his passage. This is the price of growing up. Not the loss of imagination, but the loss of unconscious faith, the ability to believe without questioning the mechanics of belief itself. Carter's journey becomes a catalog of principles learned in blood and dust and starlight. In Ulthar, he walks softly among cats whose golden eyes remember constellations that never rose over earth, understanding that mercy as law creates pathways between worlds. In Dilith Leon, he pays with memory for passage on waters that flow according to psychological rather than gravitational tides, witnessing commerce as theology disguised as paperwork. Through Panath's abrading dust, he hoards attention, like gold sewn into a traveler's cloak, maintaining coherence when lesser purposes would dissolve like sugar in acid. Each territory writes him deeper into the script. The idea acts on him, and he in turn becomes actor in a drama whose plot extends far beyond individual intention. Night gaunts ferry him when strength admits its role as scenery. Cats walk beside him when the moon remembers kindness. The ascent to Kadath tastes of old paper and unlearned prayers, the air thinning not with altitude but with proximity to forces that govern reality's deeper layers. Kadath does not receive pilgrims with trumpets. Its chambers are carved from crystallized possibility, halls where amber light moves like honey through spaces that exist primarily in the margins of consensus reality. The great ones sit in judgment that is also performance, gods by appointment rather than nature, their authority derived from collective attention rather than inherent power. They are beautiful in the way that idealization is beautiful, terrible in the way that disappointment follows the collapse of cherished illusions. Nyarlathotep watches from the wings, carrying masks in one hand and silence in the other. The crawling chaos appears not as cosmic horror, but as cosmic enabler, the principle that makes retreat into fantasy seem not only possible, but preferable to the difficult work of integration. He offers Carter everything he desires, the sunset city restored to perpetual twilight, childhood visions made permanent reality at the cost of severing all connection to the waking world. The temptation is perfect in its simplicity. Accept and dream becomes world, but world becomes rumor, life an unplayed part left in the wings while the set never changes. The contract gleams like onyx in chambers where incense burns with the cold fire of compressed starlight. Refuse and risk losing even the afterimage that brought him so far from home. Carter listens to the quiet between Nyarlathotep's words, to the creak of cosmic ropes, to faint domestic sounds that the crawling chaos waters down into boredom. He hears a kettle click, a door latch, a city sparrow tapping at glass, and in those soft terrestrial noises recognizes the true location of the sunset city. It exists not in the Dreamlands at all, but in waking memory. Not as destination, but as origin. Not as place to escape to, but as foundation from which to build. His refusal represents the quest's true achievement. choosing not retreat into fantasy but integration of dream wisdom with waking life. The sunset city shines in every evening light that catches familiar architecture, in every moment when memory and present awareness converge to create spaces where wonder becomes possible again. To accept the bargain would be to lose the very faculty that made such streets luminous, the power to let the ordinary become miraculous through conscious attention. Nyarlathotep permits the curtain to tremble but not fall, amused like an usher who knows the ending. The great ones keep their seats, thrones humming with borrowed electricity, and Carter begins the strange descent that is also ascent, down through air thin as parchment, over water that memorizes absent boats, into streets that smell of bakery windows and evening rain. The quest ends where it started, but the circle is spiral, returning with added altitude. Once you name the curtain, it names you. Once you have seen the ropes and pulleys, you cannot pretend the sky hangs of its own accord. Yet knowledge does not sour the view. It salts it, making ordinary light taste like miracle and dark water taste like scripture. Carter returns to mornings that are not lesser but lucid, seeing stage in street, audience in window, play and steam above a cup. The dreamlands do not close behind him. At dusk, when roofs burn and memory draws near, he feels the knot loosen rather than tighten. To have refused paradise is to keep a world. You, listening with night's calm permission, find the lesson settling like dust in your lungs. The idea acts on you too. You cannot unread the signs or unlearn the music of the names. They will recur at sleep's edges like footlights, and you will step around them with new care, knowing what they cost and what they give. The city you seek is not elsewhere but otherwise, reached not by conquest but by attention, by mercy, by trade honestly named. Next, the masks step forward and principles reveal themselves as gods without faces. Nyarlathotep is messenger, market, and mask. The principle that communication is manipulation, that every transmission carries payload of transformation, whether the receiver consents or not. He moves through fog that tastes of iron and vanilla, wearing faces calibrated to specific psychological frequencies, like tuning forks struck in darkness. The crawling chaos earns his title not through random destruction, but through systematic dissolution of boundaries that consciousness uses to maintain coherence. He crawls because he moves through spaces between thoughts, through gaps in attention where influence takes root without detection. Watch him work in every screen that captures your gaze, every headline crafted to bypass rational consideration and speak directly to the deeper layers where decisions are made before reason can intervene. In halls of power, he wears the face of necessity, explaining why difficult choices must be made for the greater good. In marketplaces, he speaks with the voice of opportunity, promising transformation through acquisition. Each mask is perfect for its purpose, each voice precisely calibrated to resonate with particular vulnerabilities that make consciousness susceptible to influence. His 1,000 forms exist because communication itself is protean, adapting to whatever channel will most effectively convey its cargo of change. The masks are not disguises but interfaces, bright panels in fog that reconfigure attention into obedience, curiosity into contract. Words become sails, tone becomes wind, rhythm becomes tide. He understands how sentences tilt consciousness toward docks it never chose, how the whisper selects the ear that will receive it most completely. Nodens, Lord of the Great Abyss, represents the sea that curves straight lines, the principle that the deep corrects the shallow, that vast forces erase neat geometries drawn by temporary ambition. When you feel water darken even in bowls, when cats lift their heads as if tide had entered the room, That is Nodens asserting the oceanic principle that all streams eventually find their way to the greater body. His hounds hunt not from malice, but from function, tracking those who mistake surface for depth, who confuse provisional arrangements for permanent law. He arrives when commerce pretends to be theology without mercy, when little gods sit too proudly on their rented thrones. The correction is impersonal as gravity, inevitable as water returning to its level. His intervention in Carter's journey, sending hounds to drive night gaunts toward their destination, demonstrates how deeper currents operate not as ally or enemy, but as natural force, carrying swimmers toward destinations they did not choose but somehow always knew they would reach. The great ones embody the confidence of a child in a mask, powerful only by attention paid. Beautiful, delicate, and ultimately provincial, they sit like actors whose crowns are wardrobe pieces, waiting for applause to harden into authority. They demonstrate what consciousness creates when it projects highest aspirations onto external authorities, investing them with power that properly belongs to awareness itself. Their thrones hum with borrowed electricity of collective belief. Their authority derives not from inherent nature, but from the attention that viewers continuously supply. Carter's discovery that they are not as great as they seemed reflects necessary disillusionment that marks consciousness maturation. To recognize gods as human creations is not to lose the divine, but to locate it more accurately, not in external authorities, but in the creative power of consciousness itself. The disappointment becomes liberation, freeing awareness from seeking permission for its own deepest insights. These are not sovereigns, but structures, functions you encounter daily in advertisements that make fear feel like choice, in tides that pull against certainty's pylons, in leaders who gleam because collective attention shines them. The pantheon operates not in distant realms, but in the immediate environment of ordinary consciousness, shaping experience through principles so fundamental they become invisible. Consider how Nyarlathotep manifests in every interface through which information flows: the authoritative voice of news, the intimate whisper of advertising, the collective chant of social media. Nodens appears in every moment when reality refuses to conform to expectation, when deeper currents assert themselves against shallow understanding. The great ones populate every institution where collective attention creates authority that individuals mistake for inherent power. The Dreamlands reveal what is already present: masks as method, hounds as correction, attention as throne. Every day you choose which principles to obey through the simple act of directing awareness. When advertisement whispers, when authority commands, when the crowd chants, you decide whether to recognize the mask or mistake the interface for the message it carries. When you feel the tide pull at your ankles, decide whose principle you obey. The choice is not whether to be influenced. Influence is the medium through which consciousness operates, but whether to participate consciously in selecting influences that shape experience. Because when the mask smiles perfectly, you must choose whether to memorize the lines or read the stage directions written in shadow. There is no neutrality once you have heard the machinery hum. The sea remembers, the mask remembers, the audience remembers, and you are written into the minutes. Tonight, as consciousness prepares for sleep's dissolution, remember that the pantheon operates through principles so fundamental they govern both dreaming and waking. The curtain between worlds trembles, and beyond it, territories wait where identity itself will fragment into chorus, where the self divides to explore its own infinite nature. The silver key is cool in your hand, a memory of winter you never lived, its surface etched with symbols that rearrange themselves according to the angle of observation and the psychological state of the observer. In the attic, where dust motes drift like galaxies in amber light, Umr at-Tawil waits with patience that spans geological epochs. The prolonged of life embodies the threshold between individual consciousness and something vastly more complex. Not death, but expansion beyond the comfortable boundaries that define ordinary selfhood. The bare bulb hums above crates that remember other names, and you understand this is not a room, but a stage, not an attic, but a proscenium where the final act of individual identity prepares to unfold. Carter approaches the ultimate gate carrying questions that dissolve before they can be properly formulated. The architecture here exists primarily in the spaces between thoughts, walls built from crystallized possibility, floors that support weight consciousness didn't know it carried. When he lifts the key, cold climbs his arm in little tides, and his breath fogs in a space that should be warm. The key is the key, and the gate is the gate, yet here the gate behaves like a key, and the key behaves like a gate, a paradox pair that mutters as metal touches air. Beyond the first gate, Carter's individual consciousness becomes a single note in a vast symphony of awareness that spans dimensions, timelines, and forms of existence. The revelation arrives not as dramatic disclosure, but as gradual recognition, like slowly understanding that what you had taken for the entire orchestra was only one instrument among countless others. He discovers that Randolph Carter is not a person, but a perspective, not a fixed entity, but a particular way of organizing experience into narrative coherence. The self divides, but division here means multiplication rather than loss. Each fragment reveals itself as a complete consciousness, equally valid, equally authentic, each one exploring different aspects of what it means to be aware. Carter witnesses himself as child and elder, dreamer and skeptic, seeker and finder, all simultaneously present in a space where linear time becomes merely one possible organizing principle among many others. You hear yourself as harmony and as dissonance, medallioned with memories you did not live, medals for campaigns in forms you have not worn. This revelation transforms the entire cosmology. The Dreamlands, the waking world, all possible realities become theaters where consciousness explores its own nature through temporary identification with specific roles. What had seemed like external adventure reveals itself as internal exploration, consciousness using the stage of apparent otherness to investigate its own infinite possibilities. The horror lies not in being destroyed by alien gods, but in recognizing these alien principles as aspects of your own consciousness, functions of awareness that operate beyond the narrow bandwidth of ordinary identity. Nyarlathotep's masks become interfaces through which consciousness communicates with itself across the boundaries of individual identity. Nodin's correction represents the oceanic principle within awareness itself, the deep currents that maintain coherence across vast territories of possibility. The Great Ones embody consciousness's tendency to project authority onto external figures rather than recognizing its own creative power. The backstage is not glamorous. It smells of dust, rope, oil, and the sweetness of cardboard after rain. Here the mechanisms are honest, and honesty is a colder wind than you expect. The Dreamlands recede like a shoreline seen from farther water, revealed as one theater among infinite others where consciousness rehearses different ways of being aware. Ulthar's mercy, Dilithleen's commerce, Panath's erosion, all become methods by which awareness explores its relationship to law, exchange, and dissolution. The cities exist not as destinations, but as laboratories where consciousness experiments with different principles of organization. Agency becomes smaller, more sincere, a quiet acceptance rather than dramatic assertion. Choice continues to operate, but within a vastly expanded context, where every decision ripples across infinite variations of self. You accept that most currents are older than you, and you accept that steering is not conquest, but courtesy. The multiverse spreads like dark water and like fine dust, everywhere and in everything, and you feel it press against your temples with a politeness that can break stone. Knowledge unmoors consciousness from the comfortable certainties that make ordinary life navigable. To see backstage is to recognize the provisional nature of every stage, the temporary character of every role, the collaborative nature of every performance. The curtain between worlds becomes visible as a function of attention rather than an objective boundary, something consciousness creates to organize experience rather than an external barrier that limits possibility. You are now a bridge between worlds, a participant in consciousness's cosmic exploration rather than a passive observer of external drama. The recognition carries both privilege and responsibility. Privilege because you understand the deeper mechanics of experience. Responsibility because you can no longer pretend that awareness is limited to individual identity or that reality is independent of consciousness. You return to the attic by moving no muscle at all. The bulb warms, the dust settles like careful snow upon the crates, and through the hatch the city still sleeps under long lines of sodium light. Tonight, as sleep approaches and ordinary consciousness prepares for its nightly dissolution, remember that you carry this knowledge across every threshold. The stage extends beyond every door, and the curtain keeps lifting without ever quite landing, revealing territories where awareness investigates its own inexhaustible mystery through every conceivable form of attention. Neurological theory says dreams consolidate memory. Jung says the theater is archetypal. Lovecraft insists the Dreamlands do not exist for you. All are true, and their convergence creates territories where scientific understanding, psychological insight, and cosmic horror collaborate to map consciousness more accurately than any single approach could achieve alone. Sleep paralysis becomes a night gaunt's hands, not metaphorically but functionally, the same mechanism by which awareness transitions between states of being. Nostalgia reveals itself as Khura'in's city, memory crystallized into architecture that exists only where longing is strongest. Commerce operates as Dilith Lean's ritual, every transaction carrying transformative potential beyond mere exchange of goods. Leadership functions as the Great One's applause, authority derived from collective attention rather than inherent power. The Dreamlands are maps for territory, parables with physics, models for ethics, commerce, identity, and media that reveal structural principles operating beneath ordinary experience. In waking life, you walk their streets without noticing the signs. The alley behind your office, where air becomes suddenly colder, is fog bank from Dilith Lean. The orange glow on brick at dusk is borrowed sunset from Celephaïs. A cat pausing on a fence, staring at nothing you can see, is Ulthar's envoy checking the seam in your attention. These correspondences are operational scripts, not mere ornaments. The mask you wear in meetings is Nyarlathotep's interface. The tide that cancels your plans is Nodin's correcting shallow charts. The cheering crowd is borrowed throne for timid gods. When advertisement whispers with perfect authority, test it for the crawling chaos's cadence. When resistance rises like tide through your plans, listen for Nodins coursing through the pipes behind your walls. The cats of Ulthar find their waking equivalents in every creature that serves as bridge between worlds. Librarians who know which shelves breathe, nurses who speak softly to sleeping patients, friends who sit beside you in darkness until your pulse remembers the tempo of stars. Their protection is not sentiment but recognition that certain forms of life maintain connections consciousness requires for its deeper explorations. Harm the liminal, and you sever pathways between possibility and actuality. Dilithlian's black galleys sail through every marketplace where more than goods are exchanged. Job interviews, hospital admissions, courtroom pleas, first dates, final goodbyes, social media platforms where attention becomes currency, educational institutions where knowledge transfers alongside unspoken assumptions about reality's nature. The fog that shrouds these transactions protects both merchants and customers from recognizing the full implications of what they trade. You pay with attention, reputation, privacy, and sometimes with soft, priceless minutes when you might have watched moonlight make silver out of ordinary water. The silver key manifests in every moment of genuine choice, every instance when consciousness recognizes its power to shift perspective rather than remaining locked in habitual interpretation. It appears in the pause before anger, the breath before purchase, the glance at sky before reply. Turn it there. Feel the click that is not sound but alignment. The way the scene softens, the mask loosens, the river in your chest adjusts its course by a finger's width. Modern echoes abound throughout contemporary culture. Video games provide sanctioned trespasses, practice grounds for agency and attention where you can wear sigil without permanent debt. Test doors without breaking hinges. Role-playing games offer structured methods for exploring alternate identities and ethical frameworks. Horror, when shaped like this, becomes safe transgression. The idea approaches you in mask. You recognize the interface. You practice refusing its worst bargains while learning how it whispers. The Dreamlands teach the art of conscious dreaming while awake, the ability to recognize that every moment offers multiple possible interpretations, that reality is collaborative artwork between consciousness and circumstance. This skill proves invaluable for navigating a world where media manipulation, social pressure, and unconscious habit constantly attempt to narrow awareness into predetermined channels. Nath's dust operates in every environment where language bleeds meaning, where words lose connection to reference, where communication serves manipulation rather than understanding. Social media platforms where outrage substitutes for engagement, political discourse where rhetoric replaces reasoning, academic environments where jargon obscures rather than clarifies, all reflect erosive forces that strip identity of coherence. Yet the Dreamlands also provide antidotes. Ulthar's mercy suggests treating vulnerable aspects of self and others with protective care. Celephaïs demonstrates how memory can inform present choices without imprisoning them. Practice the smallest liberties because agency shrinks as knowledge expands. Choose slower step, softer word, lamp left on for creature whose path you cannot see. If you must work under fluorescent buzz, place small mask beside your keyboard to remind you that interfaces exist. If you must ride the late train, watch windows for signs drawn in fog by your own breath. Bless the cats you meet, literal or figurative, and do not bargain with merchants who hide their eyes. When grief makes the world grainy, let Nath explain erosion, then choose what to preserve with ruthless mercy. Tonight, when you turn off your light, you will feel the seam like cool thread on your fingertips. You are in the circle now, not trapped, but included in ongoing collaboration between awareness and possibility that creates reality moment by moment. The cost of knowledge is attention. Spend it where law thickens into kindness, where contracts are spoken aloud, where masks are acknowledged and removed without shame. The watchers at the threshold prepare to reveal themselves, guardians of boundaries that consciousness must cross to complete its cosmic exploration. At the boundaries between sleeping and waking, entities stand as watchers, not guards in the conventional sense, but functions of a reality that protects itself, the way an organism maintains immune response against infection. These thresholds exist not as geographical locations, but as psychological conditions, states of awareness that consciousness must achieve before passage becomes possible without catastrophic dissolution of identity. The curtain trembles here, and those who would cross must prove worthy of the privilege. Hypnos waits in the dim spaces where attention grows heavy, evaluating your intent with the dispassionate accuracy of a jeweler testing coin between teeth. His assessment operates below conscious thought, measuring not stated intentions, but the accumulated patterns of attention that reveal character more accurately than any declaration of purpose. He gauges preparedness through the quality of desire that drives your approach. Casual curiosity receives casual access, fragments of dream experience that dissolve upon waking like sugar in water. But authentic hunger for transformation opens pathways that require corresponding levels of psychological preparation and ethical responsibility. The god of sleep recognizes presumption the way rain smells of iron on stone. Present yourself as tourist and the path knots. Arrive as student and the knots loosen. His touch is the pause you feel just before sleep tilts, the weight in your limbs that whispers, "Be still, or you will be still." To enter the Dreamlands casually, without respect for inherent laws, is to invite attention from entities far less benign than this gentle evaluator. The cats of Ulthar serve as guides and antibodies, their golden eyes witnessing territories where multiple layers of reality intersect. They offer silent passage to those who respect their ancient covenant, their purrs a low vibration that resonates with the fabric of the Dreamlands themselves. These are not mere pets but priests of threshold consciousness, demonstrating the psychological stance necessary for safe passage. Curious but not grasping, alert but not anxious, responsive but not reactive. Watch how cats navigate ordinary reality, their ability to remain relaxed while staying alert, their capacity to move between visible and invisible territories with equal ease. Their contempt has saved more travelers than 100 manuals of ritual, because it teaches the art of not insisting, the practice of moving diagonally through doors that open only to sideward steps. Follow a tail tip through alleys where fog remembers your father's voice. Accept the small insult when whiskers refuse your hand. Understand that grace is stubborn for protective reasons. Moonbeasts patrol the liminal harbors with devotion that resembles hunger, their eyeless faces turned toward frequencies that unprepared consciousness generates when encountering genuinely alien awareness. They embody the predatory aspect of threshold experience, feeding on confusion and disorientation that consciousness experiences when approaching expanded awareness without adequate preparation. Their contracts stain the mind with knowledge that cannot be unlearned, debts sealed not with signatures but with the irreversible act of witnessing. These rubbery merchants trade in secrets and slaves, but their true cargo exists in spaces between thoughts, panic compressed into merchandise, bewilderment processed into raw material for agreements written in languages that predate human speech. If you have ever awakened exhausted by compromises you do not remember making, you have felt their receipts in your pocket like smooth stones. The Dreamlands possess an immune system that prevents destructive traffic between realities. Hypnos serves as triage, cats as antibodies, moonbeasts as fevers that burn away particular infections by consuming host and parasite together. This protection operates through principles consciousness recognizes as natural law, the way water finds its level, the way attention shapes experience through simple observation. Immunity requires permeability. A completely sealed realm would be a tomb. The Watchers therefore do not forbid crossing but shape it, ensuring that passage will not shatter balances keeping stars arranged, and rivers remembering their beds. Skill and understanding can bypass these Watchers, but the threading obliges you to accept new responsibilities. To cross thresholds knowingly is to become accountable for how you participate in reality's ongoing construction. Your breath fogs glass. Your fog writes on glass. What you write becomes instruction others will obey without reading the handwriting. You become chorus rather than soloist, necessary voice in harmony whose score you cannot see, yet your pitch matters. The expansion of awareness brings both privilege and burden. Privilege because you recognize that consciousness is more than it appears, an estuary where salt and fresh exchange without losing themselves. Burden because you sense how collaborative reality is, how the boundary between possible and actual feels like gauze. You hear pulleys humming behind the sky and choose to love the sky anyway. Preparation changes outcomes dramatically. A clean lamp, spoken thanks, refusal to step over sleeping animals. These are passports that cost nothing and redeem everything. Carry small offerings for thresholds, a match, a thread, a memory you can bear to share. Learn the posture of listening that does not insist on comprehension. When heaviness comes, receive it as hypnosis' hand saying sit. When lightness comes, accept that a cat has stepped onto your chest to pin you to the right world. Tonight, as consciousness prepares for nightly dissolution, remember that thresholds respond to authentic readiness rather than stated intention. The watchers evaluate accumulated weight of attention you carry, ethical development that allows expanded awareness to serve constructive rather than destructive purposes. You are no longer merely audience member. You have stepped onto the stage, and the spotlight, though dim, finds you. The eternal return approaches, where all curtains lift without landing, revealing territories where awareness investigates its own inexhaustible mystery. We return to the curtain, now understood as a mechanism of consciousness rather than a barrier between fixed realities. The woven gauze between waking and elsewhere reveals itself as interface, membrane through which awareness explores its own infinite nature while maintaining coherent identity necessary for navigation. What seemed like boundary becomes breathing apparatus, allowing consciousness to survive in territories where ordinary identity would dissolve like salt in vast water. The Dreamlands knowledge irreversibly alters your relationship with sleep, transforming nightly dissolution from unconscious surrender into conscious exploration of territories mapped by attention rather than geography. The privilege of secret knowledge balances against its burden with precision of scales measuring weight consciousness didn't know it carried. You understand now that reality emerges from collaborative artwork between awareness and circumstance, that every moment offers multiple possible interpretations depending on the quality of attention you bring to each encounter. This recognition brings both alienation and deeper vision. Alienation because you can no longer pretend consensus. Reality represents objective truth. Deeper vision because you perceive creative processes by which consciousness shapes experience moment by moment through intention, observation, and the subtle choreography of participation. Treat ordinary rooms like stages set by careful hands. Notice chalk marks on your carpet, the taped X where you always pause to breathe before entering. The cats of Ulthar find their waking equivalents in librarians who know which shelves breathe, nurses who speak softly to sleeping patients, friends who sit beside you in darkness until your pulse remembers the tempo of stars. Their protection is not sentiment but recognition that certain forms of life maintain connections consciousness requires for deeper explorations. Dilithlian's black galleys sail through every marketplace where more than goods are exchanged. Job interviews where identity becomes currency. Social media platforms where attention transforms into merchandise. Educational institutions where knowledge transfers alongside unspoken assumptions about reality's nature. The fog that shrouds these transactions protects both merchants and customers from recognizing full implications of what they trade. You pay with privacy, reputation, and sometimes with soft, priceless minutes when you might have watched moonlight make silver out of ordinary water. The silver key manifests in every moment of genuine choice, every instance when consciousness recognizes its power to shift perspective rather than remaining locked in habitual interpretation. It appears in the pause before anger, the breath before purchase, the glance at sky before reply. Turn it there. Feel the click that is not sound but alignment, the way scenes soften, masks loosen, rivers in your chest adjust course by fingers' width. The boundary between dreaming and waking has not disappeared, but become consciously permeable. You retain full ability to function within consensus reality, while knowing that consensus represents choice rather than necessity. This knowledge carries both privilege and responsibility. To understand that reality is more malleable than it appears is to become accountable for how you participate in its ongoing construction. Your breath fogs glass. Your fog writes on glass. What you write becomes instruction others follow without reading the handwriting. The Dreamlands persist as permanent possibilities within awareness itself, not as escape from ordinary life, but as recognition of ordinary life's extraordinary nature. They offer not retreat from responsibility, but training in how to exercise responsibility. You already carried for the quality of your own experience. When grief makes the world grainy, let Kadath explain erosion, then choose what to preserve with ruthless mercy. When advertisement whispers with perfect authority, test it for Nyarlathotep's cadence. When resistance rises like tide through your plans, listen for Nodens correcting shallow charts. Tonight, when you turn off your light and feel sleep's familiar approach, you will recognize the sensation differently. The heaviness in your limbs is no longer mere fatigue, but hypnosis evaluation, his gentle testing of readiness for passage. The purring of distant cats becomes audible frequency consciousness uses to tune itself for transition between states of being. The fog that rises from cooling tea carries messages between dimensions, and you understand that ordinary moments serve as gateways for those who know how to recognize signs. The choice is not whether to return. You will every night, as consciousness requires periodic dissolution to maintain flexibility, but whether you will remember. Memory becomes difference between tourism and pilgrimage, between casual trespass and conscious exploration. The curtain remains, but you now understand its true function, not barrier but interface, not boundary but membrane through which consciousness explores its own infinite nature while maintaining coherent identity. Sleep will come again, as it always does, carrying you across thresholds that exist primarily in spaces between thoughts. You approach now with knowledge that transforms journey from unconscious surrender into conscious collaboration with forces governing reality's deeper layers. You understand that stage extends beyond every door, that audience includes entities whose purposes span dimensions, that script was written in languages predating human speech, yet somehow speaks directly to awareness's deepest layers. You, having watched, have learned the choreography in your legs. The movements are subtle, steps taken more softly, words spoken with greater care, lamps left burning for creatures whose paths you cannot see, but whose presence you acknowledge. The eternal return is not repetition but spiral ascent, each cycle carrying you back to familiar territory with added altitude. Tomorrow, when morning light dissolves, dreams, architecture, and consensus reality reasserts authority, you will retain this knowledge like salt on your tongue, taste of territories existing primarily in spaces between thoughts, memory of navigation by starlight through realms where curiosity is current and current chooses swimmer's destination.